There was the misconception that use of marijuana led to debauchery and physical violence, and for that reason, I guess the investigator, I guess we were probably more conservative than we are now. That's hard to believe. So it was considered the way alcohol was considered back in the time of Prohibition. And so it was prohibited, all uses of marijuana, because it had been used medicinally as well as for recreationally. So all uses were declared illegal, and marijuana then was given the status of a Schedule I substance, which means a substance without any recognized, any demonstrable therapeutic effects, as opposed to cocaine, which was also declared illegal for recreational use, but it still had medicinal properties as a local anesthetic, for which it is used today, to this day. And that's Schedule II. Marijuana was widely used in the 19th century for the treatment of asthma. And in the 1970s, we found that marijuana has a bronchodilator effect. It's because of the THC in marijuana. First of all, let's compare and contrast marijuana with the other, even more widely smoked substance in our society, tobacco. The tobacco was used more widely than any other smoked substance, and marijuana is second only to tobacco.
Lucy?
Yes, dear?
Give me a cigarette, will you, hon?
Don't say cigarettes, say Philip Morris.
Oh? Is there any other kind?
Not for you, there isn't. Nothing but the best for Mr. Ricardo.
Thank you. Lucy, you're so good to me.
You see how easy it is to keep a man happy? Why not give your husband a carton of Philip Morris cigarettes?
Smart move. He'll love them for their mildness, their smoothness, and their wonderful good taste. And he'll love you, too, for thinking of him.
That's right. Good night, everybody. And don't forget, call for Philip Morris. Call for Philip.
We know that if you analyze the contents of tobacco and marijuana, they're quite similar. The major difference is that tobacco contains nicotine, not found in marijuana, and marijuana contains THC and about 60 other THC-like substances called cannabinoids, not found in tobacco. But there are a lot of other particulates that are shared in common, and these include carcinogens, such as benzpyrene, the most potent of the carcinogens and considered to be responsible for a large percentage of human cancers. Benzpyrene is found in 50% higher concentration in marijuana smoke than in the smoke from a comparable quantity of tobacco. And this has been shown by 3 separate groups of chemical investigators. So the expectation is that if you smoke marijuana enough and on a regular basis, that you would incur similar risks to smoking tobacco. So what are the major health risks for tobacco? Emphysema, which I prefer to call chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. It's the new term. It consists of chronic bronchitis and emphysema. But you could have significant impairment in lung function without emphysema. It could just be due to airways disease, what we call small airways disease. But because we can't separate out the two components of COPD, emphysema, and the airways component, we lump them together. So that's COPD. So now COPD is the 4th leading cause of death in the US and in the world, and will become the 3rd leading cause in 2020. So it's a very important disease. About 120,000 Americans die each year from COPD. Probably the best evidence for separating out, the best method for separating out a COPD patient from someone else is to look at the rate of decline in lung function. I shouldn't say the best. It's probably the most informative. But it's more difficult to do because you have to make measurements every year for a number of years. And so you get a slope of the rate of loss of lung function over time. We did that. We actually measured lung function every year in our marijuana smokers up to 8 years. And we found that the slope of the decline in lung function was almost identical in the marijuana-only smokers compared to the non-smokers, where it was accelerated in the tobacco smokers. So just one other piece of evidence that marijuana is not a risk factor for the development of COPD. I think I'm convinced of that. And the other major health consequence, pulmonary health consequence of tobacco, is lung cancer. Cancer is the second most common cause of death in the U.S., and lung cancer is the most common form of cancer. And the major risk factor for lung cancer is tobacco smoking. About 160,000 Americans die each year of lung cancer. So the question that came to my mind and that of my colleagues was whether or not there was any evidence that marijuana would at least qualitatively share some of these health risks with those of tobacco. And that was the rationale for initiating our studies back in the 1980s. What is the evidence that marijuana smoking, habitual marijuana smoking, can lead to lung cancer? With respect to the development of lung cancer, we found no evidence of any increased risk of lung cancer occurrence in association with marijuana smoking alone. The marijuana smokers, if anything, had a reduced risk for developing lung cancer. Not a significantly reduced risk, but reduced less than one-fold, so that means reduced. Whereas the tobacco smokers had a markedly increased risk. If those who smoke more than 2 packs a day had a 20-fold increase in the risk. That's 2,000%. Those who smoke from 1 to 2 packs a day had an 8-fold risk. It's 800%. So that contrasts with no risk, no increased risk, or a slightly reduced risk with the marijuana smokers. THC actually has an anti-tumoral effect. And these are studies that were done both in experimental animals and in cell culture systems, and for different kinds of cancer. For lung cancer, breast cancer, thyroid cancer, prostate cancer, gliomas, brain cancer, that the development and growth, or the growth actually of the tumor is suppressed by THC, and metastases are also suppressed. So how can that be? Well, THC impairs protein synthesis, and it's what we call anti-mitogenic or anti-proliferative. You need, so tumor cells don't as readily proliferate in the presence of THC. They're also anti-angiogenic, so they interfere with the growth and development of new blood vessels that are necessary for metastatic spread. And they also are pro-apoptotic. What is apoptosis? Apoptosis is programmed cell death. So when cells age, there is a mechanism whereby the cells die. It's a non-necrotic death to die off the old cells, and we get rid of them before they have an opportunity to develop mutations that would lead to cancer. So enhancing apoptosis diminishes the risk of the cells becoming cancerous. So marijuana THC rather, turns out to be pro-apoptotic. So those appear to be the mechanisms that might account for these anti-tumoral effects of THC. We decided to do our own case-control study. Funding from the National Institute on Drug Abuse, which is a major funding agency for marijuana-related research. This was the largest study ever conducted on this subject. It was very well designed. We used the Los Angeles Tumor Registry to identify, rapidly ascertain, all the cases of lung cancer and head and neck cancer that were diagnosed in the LA County system. And of course, by the time we got to some of them, they'd already died or were too sick, but we got to it over 60% of them who agreed to participate and were able to participate. And we administered this questionnaire, and then we matched them to controls, the same age, socioeconomic status, that lived in the same neighborhood, using an algorithm that USC developed for this purpose, so that we could match, we're comparing apples with apples. And then we administered this detailed questionnaire, the food frequency questions, occupational history, all kinds of things. We also did molecular, we got a buccal smear so we could look at the DNA, we look at the genetics of lung cancer. So what we did was to recruit smokers, heavy smokers of marijuana, at least a joint a day for a week, and it ended up that the average smoker of marijuana whom we recruited smoked 3 joints a day for about 15 years. And we also required that they smoke that much for 5 years, but on the average they smoked 3 joints for 15 years. So that's about 45 to 50 joint years. A joint year is the number of joints smoked times the number of years smoked. Over the study population was, I think, between 35 and 59. I think 35 was a younger age group. Because we thought that they had to be teenagers in their early 20s at the time of at least in the marijuana epidemic, which was in the mid-60s. So prior to that time, very few people used marijuana, but after that time, it just mushroomed up to 1979, which represented actually the apex, the acme of use of marijuana in our society. So that's why we chose those age limits. And so what do we find? For any category of cannabis use, including heavy use we define as more than 10 joint years, but we looked at 20 joint years and 30 joint years. For every category of marijuana use, the ratio was less than 1, meaning reduced risk. It wasn't significantly reduced, but it was reduced. And the confidence intervals were not that wide, around the point estimate. So there was no evidence, and we controlled for all the known or putative factors, for socioeconomic status, concomitant, tobacco smoking, alcohol, etc. At the same time, when we did a similar analysis for the tobacco smokers, there was a huge effect of tobacco.
Gee, we ought to do something, Fred.
Okay. How's about taking a nap?
Hey, I got a better idea. Let's take a Winston break.
That's it. Winston is the one filter cigarette that delivers flavor 20 times a pack. Winston's got that filter blend.
Yeah, Fred. Filter blend makes the big taste difference, and only Winston has it up front where it counts. Here, ahead of the pure white filter. Winston packs rich tobaccos specially selected and specially processed for good flavor in filter smoking.
Yeah, buddy, Winston tastes good, like a cigarette should.